Hey guys, tonight we travel much farther back than golden masks or stone temples. We're going 70,000 years into the past. Long before pyramids or cities, when humanity was just another animal on the savannah. The air is heavy with dust and the smell of damp grass after a rare rain. Hyenas laugh in the distance, lions stir in the tall reeds, and the night sky stretches wide, stars uncountable. Somewhere out there, under a grove of acacia trees, a small band of humans huddles around a fire. They are us, but not quite. Their eyes glint in the firelight. Their hands grip crude stone blades. Their voices are little more than murmurs. They don't yet dream in the way you do. They don't yet tell stories that bind hundreds together. Right now, they survive day to day, bone by bone, bite by bite. And you probably wouldn't last more than a week standing next to them. The world of these early Homo sapiens is harsh. They share Africa with other human cousins, Neanderthals, Denisovans, maybe even stragglers of Homo erectus in far-off lands. None of these species know what's about to happen. None of them can sense the storm quietly brewing inside fragile skulls, but something is about to shift. Somewhere in this stretch of time, the human brain takes a leap. Not in size, the skulls of earlier humans were already large, but in wiring, in how thoughts connect, how imagination blossoms. It's as if nature flips a hidden switch, and suddenly, Homo sapiens become more than survivors. They become storytellers, planners, dreamers. Picture yourself crouched beside that fire, watching sparks drift upward. The band around you is small, maybe 20 or 30 people. Children cling to their mothers, hunters gnaw on roasted antelope bones. Elders poke at embers, they speak in grunts, gestures, maybe simple words, just enough to say, food here, or danger there. Life is immediate, fragile. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. But then imagine one person leans forward shaping a sound that isn't just a warning or command. They invent a word, a name for something that isn't present. A river 2 days away, or a predator not seen tonight. The others blink, puzzled. Then one repeats the word. Soon more words link together, meanings stretch, and suddenly the group can talk not just about what is, but what could be. This is the threshold. It's not dramatic like a volcano erupting. It's subtle, invisible, but it rewires everything. Over generations, these sparks of language grow richer, symbols take shape, and myths begin to stir. It's the birth of what we call the cognitive revolution. The moment when humans became smarter, not in muscle or speed, but in imagination and complexity. Before this leap, humans weren't much different from clever chimpanzees. They used tools, yes, sharp stones, wooden spears, but so did others. Neanderthals hunted mammoths with coordination. Crows cracked nuts with sticks. The difference was scale and subtlety, not substance. But after the revolution, humans began weaving nets, shaping bone needles, designing traps. They painted animals on cave walls, carved figures from ivory, strung beads around their necks. These weren't just survival tools, they were symbols, shared stories carved into matter. And this, more than sharp teeth or fast legs, is what made us dangerous. Stories travel farther than spears. A spear kills an antelope. A story convinces 50 people to hunt together. A stone breaks a bone. A symbol binds strangers into allies. Suddenly, small bands became tribes. Tribes became networks. And humans could cooperate in numbers no other animal could match. Think of it this way. A chimpanzee troop might manage 40 or 50 members before gossip and aggression tear it apart. Humans, armed with stories and language, could organize hundreds, even thousands. They could talk about gods, spirits, rules, and ancestors, shared fictions that glued strangers into communities. You and I live in a world of such fictions. Nations, money, laws, religions. None of them exist in nature. They exist only because humans believe them together. That trick, that leap, began 70,000 years ago. Back at the fire, the change is still fragile. Children listen to their parents tell small tales. Don't go near the river, spirits live there. At first it's just a way to keep them safe from crocodiles. But soon the tale takes a life of its own. The spirits gain names, shapes, habits. Suddenly, humans are not just reacting to danger, they're imagining, predicting, controlling. The world becomes layered. What is real and what is imagined blend into one. That blending, strange as it seems, gives humans the edge. Because imagination fuels planning. To stalk an antelope, you must imagine where it will run. To cross a desert, you must imagine water beyond the horizon. To trade with strangers, you must imagine trust in someone you've never met. Other animals live in the present. Humans, thanks to cognition, can live in past, present, and future, all at once. It's a gift, and sometimes a curse, as anyone who's ever lain awake at night worrying about tomorrow can tell you. The first steps of the cognitive revolution were slow, spread over thousands of years. It wasn't a single night by the fire, but a long dawn. Words grew into sentences. Sentences into myths. Hunters returned from expeditions with not just meat, but stories. How they fooled the gazelle. How the spirits blessed their hunt. These tales carried lessons, warnings, pride. They bonded the group tighter than blood alone. And as groups grew larger, so did ambition. People began to exchange not just goods, but ideas. A new spear design, invented in one band, spread to another. A song hummed in one valley echoed in another. The web of human thought stretched wider, denser, until it became unstoppable. No other species could compete. Neanderthals were strong, Denisovans hardy, but they could not coordinate hundreds through abstract belief. Slowly, inexorably they faded into extinction, absorbed or outcompeted by the strange, chattering newcomers who imagined worlds into being. So tonight, as you lie there listening, remember, you are the air of that firelit night. 70,000 years ago. The reason you can hear my words, picture scenes in your head, and even laugh at the thought of ancient gossip, is because your ancestors' minds took that leap. They stepped out of the animal present into the human future. And just as they once whispered around the fire, you too are part of that endless chain of imagination. The cognitive revolution was not just about getting smarter, it was about becoming storytellers. Without it, there would be no pyramids, no books, no YouTube, and certainly no bedtime history to lull you into sleep. Before the leap of imagination and language that transformed Homo sapiens into history's great storytellers, their world was simpler, grittier, narrower, and frankly, not all that glamorous. If you could drop into Africa about 80,000 years ago, before the cognitive revolution really hit its stride, you wouldn't be greeted by shining temples or clever myths. You'd find bands of humans who, despite looking nearly identical to you, lived lives more in line with animals than future kings or queens. These early Homo sapiens survived in small groups, usually no more than 30 to 50 individuals. Picture a ragged band moving across the savannah, barefoot, lean from constant hunger, carrying simple stone blades and wooden spears. Their villages weren't villages at all, just temporary camps near rivers or shaded groves. Abandoned whenever the food ran out, life was mobile and precarious. Every sunrise meant another day of searching for roots, tubers, berries, or game. Every sunset meant prayers, though not yet in the complex sense, for safety from lions, leopards, and snakes. Their tools were crude but effective. Stones chipped into sharp edges could slice meat or scrape hides. Wooden spears, hardened in fire, could be thrust into antelope or smaller animals. Yet these tools hadn't changed much for tens of thousands of years. Innovation came slowly. A hand axe from 100,000 years ago looks remarkably like one from 500,000 years ago. Humans at this stage weren't yet the restless inventors they would become. They made what worked and stuck with it, passing techniques from one generation to the next, without much experimentation. Their social lives were just as limited. Groups were bound by kinship. You trusted those you knew, distrusted everyone else. Communication was possible, but basic. Some anthropologists believe early humans at this stage may have had proto-languages, simple sounds or gestures to indicate food, danger, come here, enough to cooperate in a hunt or warn of predators, but not enough to plan complex strategies or spin tales. Imagine trying to organize a group hunt for buffalo when your vocabulary stops at buffalo there, and hit hard. Effective perhaps, but clumsy. Compare this with our modern brains, constantly juggling abstract concepts like tomorrow, or justice, or Wi-Fi password. Pre-revolution humans were stuck in the present. They could remember and anticipate in small ways. After all, even a dog remembers where a bone is buried. But they lacked the flexible imagination that lets humans today build skyscrapers or argue about taxes. Their minds were tuned for survival, find food, avoid predators, reproduce, big picture thinking. Not quite on the menu yet. Daily life revolved around hunting and gathering. Women likely did most of the gathering roots, seeds, fruits, while men cooperated to hunt larger game. But these hunts were risky, without advanced weapons or large-scale coordination. Bringing down an antelope could mean hours of stalking followed by chaos, often ending in failure. Sometimes scavenging was easier. Early humans trailed lions or hyenas, waiting until the predators finished their meal, then swooping in to crack bones for marrow. It wasn't glamorous, but marrow was rich in calories and worth the danger. Clothing was minimal. Animal hides, crudely scraped and tied, enough to shield from cold nights. Shelter was equally basic, caves if available, or makeshift windbreaks of branches and grass. Fire was their greatest ally, both for cooking and protection, though controlling it was still an art. A smoldering branch carried from one camp to another could mean the difference between warmth and shivering. Their world was loud and perilous. Lions roared at night, insects whined, and thunder cracked over wide plains. The smell of sweat, smoke, and blood mingled in every camp. Illness was constant, parasites, infections, fevers. With no medicine beyond herbs and luck, lifespans were short. Many children died young. Adults who reached 30 were already considered elders. And yet, even in this raw existence, you can sense glimmers of the coming change. Some bones from ancient burials suggest care. Bodies arranged with ochre, tools placed beside them. Was this ritual, or simply practicality? Burying tools with the dead, so others wouldn't touch them. Either way, it hints at symbolic thought just waiting to bloom. Neanderthals, living farther north, weren't much different. They were stockier, stronger, perfectly adapted to cold climates, and skilled hunters. They used stone tools similar to Sapiens, lived in small groups, and had social bonds. Denisovans, known mostly from DNA, likely had similar habits. In this period, Homo sapiens were just one branch among several. None of them yet showed the explosive creativity that would later sweep the planet. You might say these early humans were stuck. Strong enough to survive, smart enough to adapt, but not yet able to leap into abstraction. They had the hardware, the big brain, but not the software updates. That would come soon, and when it did, the world would tilt forever. Until then, though, their lives were narrow. Each sunrise meant scanning the horizon for prey or rival bands. Each sunset meant huddling close to the fire, listening to the crackle of wood and the howl of predators. Survival was the only story they knew, and they told it with their scars, not their words. Imagine yourself there for a day. You wake before dawn, stomach gnawing with hunger. The group splits. Some head for berry patches, others stalk antelope. Hours pass in silence, broken only by gestures and grunts. If the hunt fails, you chew roots and hope tomorrow is better. If a child falls sick, there is nothing you can do but watch. By nightfall, you collapse by the fire, eyes darting at every sound in the dark. You don't dream of gods or empires or futures. You dream of meat, warmth, safety. That is enough for now. But inside your skull, the potential waits. Neurons fire in patterns just beginning to expand. Somewhere in the coming millennia, a child will ask a question not about what is here, but about what isn't. And when that question is answered with imagination, humanity will never be the same again. If early Homo sapiens lived for tens of thousands of years in a holding pattern, hunting, gathering, surviving with tools that barely changed, what finally flipped the switch? How did brains already as large as ours suddenly begin to think in ways no other animal could? Scholars call this turning point the cognitive revolution. And while the exact cause is debated, theories circle around one key idea: something shifted in the wiring of the human brain, allowing new connections, faster thought, and imagination that reached far beyond the immediate present. One explanation is genetic. Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, a mutation may have altered how neurons linked up, especially in areas tied to language and symbolic thinking. It didn't make brains bigger. Neanderthals, in fact, had slightly larger skulls. Instead, it made brains more flexible, capable of inventing new ideas and carrying them forward. Imagine suddenly upgrading the operating system on a computer. The hardware is the same, but suddenly you can run programs no one dreamed of before. That, in essence, was humanity's leap. Another theory focuses on social pressure. Human groups were growing larger, and surviving in those bands required keeping track of dozens of relationships. Who had shared food yesterday? Who could be trusted in a hunt? who was likely to cheat. This mental bookkeeping may have pushed brains to develop better memory, more nuanced communication, and even the ability to lie, because sometimes survival required deception as much as honesty. In this view, intelligence wasn't just about tools, it was about navigating the messy jungle of human relationships. A third perspective emphasizes environment. Around this time, climate change shook Africa. Periods of drought and shifting ecosystems forced humans to adapt quickly, exploring new landscapes, hunting unfamiliar animals, and gathering scarce resources. Harsh conditions favored individuals who could plan ahead, imagine alternatives, and cooperate in new ways. Evolution sharpened imagination as a survival strategy. After all, the ability to picture water beyond the next ridge, or predict how herds would move with the seasons, meant life or death. Whichever factor or combination sparked the change, the result was dramatic. Within a relatively short span of time, humans began showing behaviors utterly alien to earlier generations. Archaeological layers suddenly fill with more sophisticated tools, ornaments, and symbolic artifacts. It's as if someone flipped on a light and the dark cave of human potential filled with sparks. Think of the human brain as a vast forest. Before the revolution, paths wound through it, narrow and predictable. Food, danger, sleep, repeat. Afterward, new trails blazed through the trees, connecting distant ideas. A stick wasn't just a stick. It could be a spear, or a digging tool, or even a symbol in a ritual. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was a weapon, a gathering place, a metaphor. Humans began to think not just about objects, but about meanings, and those meanings multiplied. One of the most striking changes was in communication. Proto-languages with simple signals expanded into complex speech. Suddenly, humans could string words into sentences, sentences into stories. This wasn't just about gossip, though gossip played its role. It was about transferring knowledge more efficiently. A mother could warn her child about a predator without pointing to it. A hunter could describe where herds might be found tomorrow. Entire groups could discuss strategy rather than relying on instinct. For the first time, information could live outside the moment. And then came imagination. This was the real revolution. Other animals communicate about what is food here, danger there. Humans began talking about what wasn't there. They could discuss ancestors long dead, spirits invisible in the trees, or plans for next season's migration. They could create fictions, shared ideas that existed only in minds but bound groups together. Myths of spirits or rules of behavior became real in effect, because people believed them together. This shift, subtle as it seems, had explosive consequences. With imagination, humans could cooperate flexibly in large groups. Instead of being limited to small bands of relatives, they could unite hundreds of strangers under shared stories. Belief in a spirit, a totem animal, or a clan symbol allowed people to trust each other, without personal ties. For the first time, humans could scale society beyond family. Archaeological evidence supports this change. Around 70,000 years ago, artifacts of symbolic culture appear. Beads made of shells, red ochre used for body painting, carvings with no practical purpose beyond expression. These are the fingerprints of minds that no longer lived only in the present. They dreamed, decorated, and ritualized. A bead necklace might seem trivial, but it represented status, identity, belonging. To make one was to declare, I am part of this story. It's worth noting that not every group experienced this change simultaneously. The cognitive revolution wasn't a single explosion, but a wildfire spreading across populations. Some bands adopted new behaviors quickly, others lagged, yet the momentum built, and once humans had the spark of imagination, it proved unstoppable. Within a few thousand years, a blink in evolutionary time, sapiens were painting caves, crossing seas, and edging out their rivals. Imagine sitting in a camp during this threshold moment. A hunter returns from the plains, and instead of just handing over meat, he gestures, then speaks. Tomorrow, at the bend in the river, the herds will come. The group leans forward, understanding not just the words but the idea of planning. They can act on something that hasn't happened yet. Or picture a mother telling her child, don't go into the reeds, there is a spirit there. The child obeys, not because of direct fear, but because of belief. These tiny steps, planning, imagination, fiction, are the building blocks of every civilization to come. The irony is that this leap didn't necessarily make life easier in the short term. Bigger imaginations meant bigger anxieties. A hyena you see is scary enough. A hyena you imagine lurking in the dark is worse. The same brain that invented myths for unity also invented nightmares. Worry, superstition, and fear are side effects of the same cognitive power that gave us art and strategy. The revolution was a double-edged tool, powerful, but not always kind. And yet, without it, we wouldn't be here. The ability to think beyond the immediate, to imagine and communicate complex ideas, is the defining feature of Homo sapiens. It's why our species spread across the globe while Neanderthals dwindled. It's why we can talk tonight about people who lived 70 millennia ago. So next time you catch yourself worrying about tomorrow, or daydreaming about something that doesn't exist, remember, that's the cognitive revolution still humming in your head. Your brain is carrying the legacy of that ancient switch, the one that turned survival animals into storytellers. Now that the human brain had unlocked new pathways of thought, the revolution really began to accelerate with something deceptively simple but utterly transformative: language. Not just grunts and gestures, not even the clipped proto-words of earlier humans, but fully developed, layered, flexible language. This was the true multiplier. With language, early Homo sapiens went from surviving in small, wary groups to building shared worlds of meaning that could outlast memory. Picture a band of 30 people on the African savannah. Before language, communication meant pointing at a gazelle and saying something like food, or pointing at the horizon and saying danger. Useful, sure, but shallow. After language evolved, those same people could suddenly say, tomorrow, if we wait by the river at sunrise, the gazelles will come to drink, but we must hide behind the reeds. That's strategy. That's planning. And it only works if words can bend to describe time, place, and possibility. The expansion of vocabulary was like an arms race. Words for objects, tree, river, fire, blossomed into words for actions: hunt, hide, strike. Soon came words for relationships: mother, friend, stranger. And then the leap into abstraction: before, after, tomorrow, always, never. Each new term opened doors. To say tomorrow is to imagine a future. To say never is to grasp impossibility. These words weren't just labels, they were tools for thought itself. Language also carried emotional weight. A grunt can warn, but a sentence can persuade. Imagine a leader telling a story about how the spirits bless hunters who share meat, while punishing the selfish. Suddenly generosity isn't just practical, it's sacred. The story spreads, and now sharing becomes a social norm. Through language, values became portable, binding groups with invisible threads stronger than any rope. Gossip, of all things, may have been the secret sauce. As groups grew larger, keeping track of who was trustworthy became tricky. Language allowed people to whisper about who cheated in a hunt, who hoarded food, who was brave or cowardly. Gossip, far from being trivial, acted as social glue. It kept reputations intact or destroyed them, and in doing so, made cooperation on a larger scale possible. A chimpanzee troop can only manage around 50 individuals before chaos breaks out. Humans, armed with gossip, could scale far beyond that. But language did more than manage groups. It opened the floodgates of imagination. With words, humans could describe things that didn't exist. You could tell someone about a lion you imagined lurking in the grass, and they would react as if it were real. You could tell a story of ancestors watching from the sky, and others would believe enough to change their behavior. Language created fictions, and fictions shaped reality. This ability to share fictions became the foundation of culture. A group could invent a myth about a river spirit, and suddenly the entire band avoided dangerous waters. Another group could tell tales of heroic hunters, passing down strategies and values through narrative. Children learned not just from watching but from listening. Knowledge leapt across generations faster than genetics ever could. The archaeological record shows this shift vividly. Around 70,000 years ago, we begin to see not just tools, but symbolic objects. Beads, strung from shells, red ochre smeared on bodies, carvings of animals and human forms. These weren't for survival in a physical sense. They were for survival in a social one. A necklace said, "I belong." Red paint said, "I am part of the ritual." Such symbols only work when everyone agrees on their meaning, and that agreement requires language. Cave art is perhaps the most breathtaking example. In places like Chauvet and Lascaux, humans painted animals with astonishing realism, Lions stalking, horses galloping, rhinos clashing. These weren't doodles, they were visual stories. Hunters may have gathered by torchlight to retell great hunts, or to invoke spirits of the animals they pursued. Without language, those stories remain silent. With it, they become performances, communal experiences that shape identity. Think of the difference between pointing at an antelope and yelling "hunt," versus sitting around a fire and weaving a tale about how the great ancestor once outsmarted an antelope, and how tomorrow, if you follow his steps, you too will succeed. The first gets you fed, the second creates culture. Even tools advanced through language. One person could teach another how to shape a sharper blade, not just by demonstration but by explanation. Strike here, not there. Use this angle, not that. Skills could be refined, passed along, and improved over generations. Knowledge no longer died with individuals. It accumulated. This was the snowball effect of language. Each generation could start a little farther ahead. Of course, language also had its pitfalls. Lies became possible. Rumors could spark fear. Myths could divide as much as unite. The same tongue that told stories of cooperation could spread tales of suspicion, curses, and blame. Humans had unlocked a power that cut both ways. But whether binding or breaking, language gave sapiens control over worlds far larger than their immediate surroundings. Imagine being part of such a group as this shift unfolded. You're huddled near a fire, listening to an elder recount how the stars are campfires of ancestors. You glance upward, and for the first time the night sky feels less empty. Or you watch a hunter teach a boy how to stalk with patience. Not through gestures but through words, painting vivid pictures. These are the moments when humanity's inner voice grew louder than the howls of the wilderness. Language was the software update that supercharged the human brain's hardware. With it we built myths, rules, reputations, and plans. We could imagine together, believe together, and act together. And from those shared words rose the beginnings of everything else. Art, religion, trade, politics, eventually nations and empires. So the next time you mutter to yourself in the shower, argue with a friend, or read a bedtime history script, remember you're exercising the very power that turned fragile bands of foragers into masters of the planet. Language didn't just let us talk, it let us dream out loud, and dreaming out loud is what made us human. With language weaving webs of meaning and memory, humans soon stumbled into a force even more potent. Imagination. The cognitive revolution wasn't just about saying there's food by the river. It was about saying there's a spirit by the river who blesses us if we leave an offering. Suddenly humans weren't only talking about the world they could touch and smell, they were inventing worlds that existed only in the mind. And once those worlds were shared, they became just as powerful as the real one. Think about what that meant for a small band of foragers. Before, they cooperated out of necessity. Your survival depended on your sister's roots and your cousin's spear. But with imagination, cooperation could stretch beyond kin. If everyone in the group believed in the same spirit or the same ancestor, they could trust each other more deeply. Fiction became the glue that held strangers together. Archaeologists see hints of this in early symbolic practices. Burial sites from around 70,000 years ago show bodies sprinkled with red ochre, sometimes with tools or beads placed alongside. These weren't practical. Dead people don't need jewelry, but symbolic. They reveal belief in something beyond death, a story of spirits or an afterlife. That belief shaped how people treated each other, how they mourned, how they bound themselves into a community that stretched beyond the grave. Imagination also gave rise to myth-making. Around the fire, humans began telling tales not just of yesterday's hunt, but of powerful beings, trickster animals, or heroic ancestors. These myths served more than entertainment. They carried lessons, reinforced norms, and created a shared identity. Our people are brave like the lion. Our ancestor brought fire from the mountain. These weren't literal, but they bound the group with invisible cords of story. Compare this to animals like chimpanzees. A chimp can communicate about food or threats, but it cannot invent a story of an ancestor who punished cheaters or rewarded generosity. Without shared fictions, cooperation remains limited. Humans, by contrast, could imagine rules enforced by unseen forces. If you broke a taboo, the spirits would know, even if no humans saw. That's an incredibly effective way to regulate behavior, especially in larger groups. Imagination also sharpened creativity. Why settle for one way of hunting when you could imagine another? Why accept one style of shelter when you could picture improvements? The mind's ability to play with possibilities turned humans into relentless tinkerers. A branch wasn't just firewood, it could be a spear, a digging stick, or a symbol of authority. Imagination expanded the menu of survival strategies, making sapiens adaptable in ways no other species could match. But imagination's greatest trick was scale. Stories let people cooperate with hundreds they would never meet face to face. It's one thing to trust your cousin in a hunt. It's another to trust a stranger from across the valley. How do you know he won't betray you? Because you both believe in the same myth, follow the same ritual, honor the same ancestor. That shared fiction creates trust where none existed before. Fast forward in your mind, and you'll see the same principle alive today. Nations exist because millions believe in a flag. Money has value because billions believe in its worth. Laws bind societies because people agree they do. These are all fictions, real in effect, but not in nature. The first seeds of that system sprouted when sapiens around a fire began telling stories of gods, spirits, and rules. Of course, imagination came with downsides. Beliefs could mislead as easily as they could unite. Superstition could cause fear, scapegoating, or needless rituals. A rustle in the grass might be a lion, or just the wind. But if your myth told you it was a spirit, you might waste energy on offerings instead of sharpening spears. Yet, in evolutionary terms, the benefits outweighed the costs. Groups bound by belief outcompeted groups without it. Picture one such group at dusk. A hunter has returned wounded, his leg torn by a wild boar. The group gathers, anxious. Instead of despair, the elder lifts his voice. The ancestor is testing us. If we tend him well, the spirits will reward our hunt tomorrow. The group nods, comforted. They bandage the man, share food, and sleep with renewed hope. Whether or not the spirits exist, the story keeps them united and resilient. That resilience is the power of imagination. And imagination wasn't only spiritual. It fueled art, play, and curiosity. Children invented games with rules only they understood, training their minds for abstract thought. Adults painted animals on cave walls, not just to record but to dream, perhaps to control the hunt through ritual, perhaps to leave marks of meaning for future eyes. Every brushstroke of ochre or charcoal was a declaration. We can make the invisible visible. It's humbling to realize how small the spark was that lit this fire. A mutation here, a shift there, and suddenly humans could dream together. That dreaming changed everything. Bands turned into tribes, tribes into cultures. Culture became humanity's secret weapon, far more powerful than claws or teeth. It let knowledge accumulate, myths evolve, and cooperation scale. So tonight, as you listen, remember that the same imagination that once invented spirits by rivers is alive in you. When you daydream, write a story, or even joke about something absurd, you're flexing the same mental muscle that lifted our ancestors above the savannah. The cognitive revolution wasn't a one-time event. It's still happening. Every time we imagine something new. Close your eyes and imagine those early humans again. Fire crackling, faces lit in orange glow, voices weaving tales of things unseen. Outside, predators lurk, but inside, in the circle of light, stories hold the group together. That was the true beginning of humanity. Not just survival, but imagination shared. If imagination lit the spark, social cooperation was the roaring fire it fed. Humans had always needed to work together to survive. One person alone with a stick was no match for a lion or a stampede of buffalo. But before the cognitive revolution, cooperation had natural limits. Bands rarely grew larger than 50 or so individuals, because that was about the maximum number of relationships anyone could personally track. Beyond that, trust unraveled. Arguments flared, resources were hoarded, and groups fractured. With new language and imagination, those ceilings shattered. Suddenly, Homo sapiens could bind not just family but strangers, not just small bands but sprawling communities. The secret was belief, shared stories, shared symbols, shared rules that allowed people to cooperate on scales no other species could manage. Where chimpanzees tore each other apart beyond 50 members, humans leapt to hundreds, and eventually thousands. Gossip was the most underrated tool in this expansion. At first glance it seems petty, but gossip is information management. Who's trustworthy? who stole meat last week, who fought bravely against the hyenas. A single conversation can spread reputations like wildfire. In small groups, gossip keeps everyone accountable. In larger groups, it extends trust beyond direct experience. You might never have hunted with a man, but if everyone says he shares fairly, you'll risk joining him on the plains. Gossip is a primitive form of social credit score, and it let humans scale cooperation far faster than rivals. But gossip alone couldn't unite hundreds. For that, humans invented shared fictions, myths, rituals, and taboos that everyone agreed upon. Imagine two bands meeting by a river. Normally tension would rise. Strangers meant danger. But if both bands painted themselves with the same ochre pattern, or invoked the same ancestor spirit, trust blossomed. They could trade goods, share mates, or hunt together. A shared story dissolved suspicion. Anthropologists sometimes call this the fiction threshold. Other animals cooperate, but only with kin or in simple alliances. Wolves hunt in packs. Dolphins coordinate attacks on fish. Chimpanzees form temporary coalitions, but none of them can invent a belief in an invisible force or a symbolic rule to unite strangers. Only Sapiens could say, "We are one people because we all honor the same spirit," and have it actually work. Cooperation expanded in daily tasks too. Hunting evolved from small ambushes to coordinated drives. Imagine dozens of hunters surrounding a herd, shouting, waving torches, driving animals into a ravine. That kind of scale requires planning, trust, and split-second communication. Gathering improved as well. Bands could spread out over wide territories, confident that others would share their findings at a central meeting. Even childcare became communal, freeing mothers to forage or rest while others watched over infants. Rituals cemented this cooperation. Early humans likely danced together, sang chants, or performed ceremonies before hunts. These weren't just for fun, they created synchrony, aligning bodies and minds into a single rhythm. Studies today show that synchronized movement releases chemicals that strengthen trust. Ancient humans didn't need neuroscience to feel it. They knew that after a dance, a group felt tighter, braver, more willing to face the world together. Symbols amplified the effect. Beads, tattoos, body paint, all served as visual markers of identity. If you saw someone wearing the same style of necklace, you knew they shared your story. This was early branding, a way of broadcasting "I am one of you." And once groups could identify each other by symbols, alliances could form, trade networks began to stretch farther, connecting distant bands who trusted each other through shared culture. The impact on survival was enormous. Bigger groups meant better defense. A lone band of 30 might lose half its members in a clash with predators or rival humans. A coalition of 200 could fight back, overwhelming threats. Larger communities also meant more consistent food supplies. If one area's roots failed, allies elsewhere could share surplus, and with more minds came more innovation. A clever tool or trick spread rapidly across networks, improving everyone's odds. Of course, cooperation came with tension. As groups grew, hierarchies emerged. Leaders, elders, and shamans gained influence, sometimes hoarding resources or bending myths to their advantage. Cooperation required constant maintenance, gossip to keep leaders honest, rituals to renew bonds, punishments to deter freeloaders. The same imagination that united groups also enabled cunning manipulation. But even with these flaws, larger communities consistently outperformed smaller ones. Picture a gathering at a seasonal festival. Several bands converge near a river where fish run thick. Fires burn, drums beat, voices rise in chants. Strangers mingle, exchange goods, arrange marriages, tell stories of hunts and spirits. What could have been a clash of rivals becomes a celebration of unity, all because everyone believes in the same shared myths and symbols. That gathering isn't just a party, it's the engine of cooperation, the key to survival in a dangerous world. And think of the alternative. Neanderthals, for all their strength and intelligence, likely remained limited by smaller group sizes. They could cooperate in bands, maybe even in extended families, but they never developed the storytelling glue that united strangers. That difference may explain why Sapiens, not Neanderthals, spread like wildfire across the globe. In the long run, cooperation beat muscle. In modern life, you still feel the power of this revolution. Every time you cheer for a sports team, salute a flag, or wear a uniform. You're echoing the same cognitive trick your ancestors discovered. Strangers become allies because you share a story. That is the legacy of the cognitive revolution's social leap. So as you drift tonight, imagine the firelit circle growing wider. More voices join, more hands clasp, more feet stomp in rhythm. The band becomes a tribe. The tribe a people. The people a culture. What began as fragile gossip and whispered myth swells into a chorus that can move mountains. Cooperation, born of imagination, was the force that made humanity unstoppable. Once humans began cooperating on larger scales, the ripple effects touched every corner of daily life, especially in the tools they made. Before the cognitive revolution, the toolkit of Homo sapiens was modest and slow to change. A chipped stone hand axe, a sharpened stick, maybe a fire-hardened spear. These had been around for hundreds of thousands of years, with little variation. Functional, yes, but not revolutionary. After imagination and cooperation took root, though, tools exploded in diversity and complexity. Picture an early campsite before the leap. Hunters return with crude spears, just sticks with fire-blackened tips. They can thrust them into prey at close range, but it's dangerous. Many hunts end with wounds or empty stomachs. The tools work, but barely. Now fast forward a few thousand years into the revolution. Spears gain stone points, carefully napped and tied with sinew. The tips are sharper, deadlier, and can pierce hide or bone. Then come throwing spears and eventually the atlatla, a spear thrower that uses leverage to hurl a projectile farther and harder than any arm could alone. Suddenly, prey that once required risky ambushes can be hunted from a safer distance, and the tools don't stop with weapons. Stone blades are refined into scrapers, drills, and knives, each with specialized uses. Need to skin an antelope? There's a tool for that. Need to pierce leather for sewing? Another tool. This specialization shows a new way of thinking, abstract problem solving. Instead of making one generic tool for many jobs, humans began designing many tools for specific tasks. It's the prehistoric equivalent of inventing the Swiss Army knife, only spread across an entire toolkit. Bone and antler enter the picture too. Where earlier humans saw only leftovers from dinner, Revolution-era Sapiens saw possibilities. Bone needles appear, complete with drilled eyes for threading fibers. With these, humans could sew fitted clothing, stitched tight against cold winds. That leap meant survival in harsher climates, from Ice Age tundras to wind-blown steppes. Antler became harpoons, perfect for fishing or sealing. Ivory was carved into both tools and symbolic objects, blending practicality with imagination. Fire itself became a tool in new ways. Instead of merely keeping warm or scaring predators, humans learned to use it to harden wood, cook thoroughly, and even reshape landscapes. Controlled burns encouraged edible plants to grow, lured grazing animals to fresh shoots, and cleared brush. This wasn't full-scale farming yet, but it was the seed of environmental engineering. Fire became not just survival but strategy. Innovation spread faster now too. Language allowed someone who discovered a better blade-making technique to teach it step by step. No more relying solely on imitation. You could explain, correct, refine. Techniques accumulated, passed down not just through memory but through shared instruction. Knowledge became communal property, improving with each retelling. This was the birth of cumulative culture, where each generation starts ahead of the last. And cooperation made tools even more advanced. Imagine a group working together to build a large net from woven fibers. Alone it would take forever. Together it's manageable. With the net, they could trap dozens of fish at once, or drive birds into enclosures. That kind of group engineering required not just hands, but shared vision. Everyone had to agree on the plan, follow steps, and trust that the payoff would come. Tools were no longer just personal items. They became collective projects. Archaeological finds tell the story in fragments. In South Africa, stone points dating to around 71,000 years ago show signs of heat treatment. Humans deliberately used fire to improve stone's flaking properties. In Europe, later Homo sapiens made blades so fine they resemble surgical instruments. In Siberia, carved ivory needles appear, tiny but precise. These artifacts speak of minds that weren't content with good enough. They tinkered, experimented, perfected. Tools also crossed into symbolic realms. Some objects, like decorated blades or carved figurines, had no clear survival purpose. They were artful, aesthetic, perhaps ritualistic. A beautifully flaked spear point might have carried prestige, proof of skill, patience, and creativity. In this sense, tools became part of social life, markers of identity as much as instruments of survival. Weaponry, of course, had social consequences. More effective weapons made hunting safer, but also made conflict deadlier. A sharp stone-tipped spear doesn't care whether it pierces an antelope or a rival. As groups grew and competed, better weapons likely decided who survived. The balance of power shifted to those who innovated fastest. This arms race pushed creativity further, ensuring that tool-making remained central to survival. Consider how radical this must have felt to the humans living it. A grandmother teaches her granddaughter not only how to chip stone, but why one technique works better than another. A father demonstrates how to attach sinew tightly, explaining the importance of drying it first. A hunter invents a new way to carry embers from one camp to the next, and becomes celebrated for saving the group hours of labor. Each moment of ingenuity reinforced the value of thinking differently. And once tools became more varied, tasks could be divided. Some individuals, specialized skilled flint knappers, expert weavers, master hunters. Division of labor wasn't formal, but even informal specialization boosted efficiency. One person's knack for tool-making could lift the survival odds of the entire band. That interdependence deepened cooperation, making groups even more cohesive. Even play became a testing ground for tools. Children practiced with miniature weapons or simple toys, imitating adults. In doing so, they honed skills that would one day save lives. Play wasn't frivolous, it was training for survival and invention. Through games, the culture of tools passed effortlessly to the next generation. So much of what we take for granted today, the idea that innovation is constant, that tools can always improve, that knowledge builds cumulatively, traces back to this period. Before the cognitive revolution, a stone axe might look the same for 500,000 years. After it, change became the only constant. Humans had discovered not just how to survive, but how to reimagine survival. Picture the camp at twilight. Spears lean against rocks, their points gleaming in firelight. Women sit threading sinew through bone needles, stitching hides into warm cloaks. Children chase each other with little sticks, pretending to hunt. A man tests a new scraper on an antelope hide, frowning, adjusting, then smiling at the smoother edge. Around them lies the quiet evidence of transformation. Tools, tools, tools. Each one is a piece of imagination made solid, a fragment of thought hammered into matter. This was the revolution in action. Humans no longer waited for nature to provide. They shaped nature with their minds and hands. Every blade, every net, every stitched garment was a declaration. We can do more than endure, we can create. And that mindset, once sparked, would never fade. While sharper spears, fire-hardened blades, and bone needles gave sapiens a survival edge, something else bloomed alongside them that revealed an entirely new dimension of the mind: art. For the first time in human history, people began creating objects, images and symbols that weren't strictly about survival. A beautifully flaked spear point might kill prey, but ochre smeared on the body, beads strung into necklaces, or horses painted on cave walls didn't feed the belly, they fed something else. Identity, imagination, perhaps even the soul. The earliest traces show up tens of thousands of years ago. In scattered sites across Africa and Eurasia, archaeologists find pieces of red ochre, carved with crosshatch patterns, their surfaces rubbed smooth by hands. Were they doodles, symbols, ritual markings? Whatever they were, they marked a step beyond practicality. Early humans weren't just making tools, they were making meaning. Take beads, for example. Shell beads found in Blumbo's cave in South Africa date to roughly 75,000 years ago. Someone drilled tiny holes into shells, strung them on fibers, and wore them. Jewelry serves no direct purpose in hunting or gathering, but socially, it says everything. Beads proclaim, I belong to this group, or I hold status, or simply, I am beautiful. They broadcast identity, and identity unites. Then came figurines. The so-called Venus figurines, carved from stone, bone, or ivory, appear across Ice Age Europe. Rounded bodies, emphasized hips and breasts, symbols perhaps of fertility, abundance, or female power. We may never know exactly what they meant, but they were clearly more than toys. They embodied ideas, values, and mysteries, giving form to invisible concepts. And of course, there are the cave paintings. Step into Chauvet Cave in France, painted around 30,000 years ago, and you find walls alive with lions, mammoths, horses, and rhinos. The artistry is breathtaking, shading, motion, even perspective. These weren't crude doodles by people who barely knew what they were doing. They were skilled works, deliberate, careful, illuminated by flickering torches. The artists mixed pigments, chose surfaces, and sometimes painted in spots deep within caves where few would ever go. This wasn't casual decoration. It was ritual, performance, magic. Why paint a lion on stone when a lion is outside on the plains? One theory is hunting magic. To paint an animal was to gain power over it, to envision success before the hunt. Another theory is storytelling, recounting hunts, passing on lessons, teaching the young. Still another is purely symbolic, a way to connect with spirits, ancestors, or forces unseen. Whatever the reasons, cave art showed something profound. Humans had begun creating worlds that existed only in the imagination, then projecting them onto stone so others could share them. Art also acted as social glue. When a group gathered to watch a painter outline a mammoth by torchlight, they weren't just looking at lines, they were sharing belief, pride, and wonder. The same was true of music. Bone flutes found in Germany, carved 40,000 years ago from vulture wing bones, played haunting notes in caves. Picture groups huddled together, flutes and drums echoing off stone, voices raised in rhythm. That music wasn't about survival, but it made survival easier by binding groups with harmony and emotion. And don't underestimate playfulness. Some carvings are whimsical, even humorous. Hybrids of humans and animals, exaggerated figures, little toys. Imagination didn't just serve ritual. It also brought joy. Laughter and creativity reduced tension, strengthened bonds, and gave people resilience against a hard world. A group that could laugh together had better odds of surviving grief and hunger than one that couldn't. Symbols became more complex too. Painted handprints in caves, sometimes adult, sometimes child, were like signatures, saying, "I was here." Geometric patterns, dots, zigzags, spirals, hint at abstract thought, even proto-writing. These marks suggest minds experimenting with communication beyond spoken words, storing meaning in matter for others to read later. It was the dawn of humanity's love affair with symbols, an affair that would one day give rise to alphabets, books, and glowing screens. You can imagine the impact on children growing up in this environment. A child sees their mother wear beads, hears music echo in a cave, or watches an elder paint. Their world is no longer just meat and fire, it's color, pattern, rhythm. Their imagination ignites earlier, grows stronger, and carries into adulthood. Each generation raised in a richer symbolic world adds to it, creating an upward spiral of culture. What's striking is how quickly art spread once it appeared. From Europe to Africa to Asia, symbolic artifacts multiply around the same time. This suggests that once the cognitive door opened, humans everywhere rushed through it. The impulse to decorate, to symbolize, to create, seems universal, a fundamental feature of our species. Art also shaped identity across groups. Different bands developed different styles of ornaments or motifs, marking themselves apart. Just as modern people wear logos or uniforms, Ice Age humans displayed group identity through beads, tattoos, or painted designs. These visual signals communicated belonging instantly, even across language barriers. Art became both a unifier and a boundary. And yet, art was never just decoration. It was power. To paint, sing, or carve was to participate in mystery, to bring the unseen into the scene. Shamans, those who mediated between worlds, likely used art as part of their rituals, guiding groups through fear, illness, or transition. In this sense, art and spirituality were entwined from the start. So why does this matter for the cognitive revolution? Because it shows that humans had begun to think symbolically, to use their minds not only for survival, but for meaning. They could step outside the immediate needs of hunger or safety and create worlds of ideas, beauty, and belief. This symbolic imagination distinguished sapiens from every other creature on Earth. Picture it. A dark cave, lit by flickering flames. The air smells of smoke and damp earth. On the wall, a horse seems to gallop, its mane wild, its body alive in ochre and charcoal. Beside you, someone plays a flute, the notes trembling in the chamber. Around you, people watch in awe, whispering of spirits and ancestors. In that moment, humanity is no longer just surviving. Humanity is dreaming. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember that the very images filling your mind, scenes you've never touched, voices you've never heard, are the gift of that revolution. You are the descendant of painters, singers, and storytellers who discovered that survival wasn't enough. They sought beauty, meaning, and connection. And in doing so, they became fully human. Art and imagination were not luxuries. They were fuel for sharper strategies. Once humans had the ability to picture futures and share ideas through language, the way they hunted and gathered shifted dramatically. Before, hunting meant charging at animals with sticks, hoping strength and luck would deliver meat. Gathering meant trial and error, learning which berries killed and which nourished, one mistake at a time. After the cognitive revolution, hunting and gathering became smarter, planned, coordinated, and backed by stories that taught and warned. Start with hunting. Imagine a herd of gazelles grazing near a river. In pre-revolution times, a band might creep close and rush in with spears, chaotic and dangerous. Many hunts ended with empty hands, or worse, broken bone. After the leap, though, humans could sit around a fire the night before and plan. Tomorrow, some of us hide by the reeds, others chase the herd toward them. When they run, they'll be trapped. That shift from instinct to strategy was monumental. For the first time, humans weren't just reacting to prey, they were predicting and manipulating prey behavior. Cooperation made new methods possible. Groups learned to drive animals into natural traps. Cliffs, ravines, swamps. Archaeologists find evidence of entire herds forced into mass kills, leaving behind piles of bones at single sites. This wasn't luck, it was planning. Dozens of people, maybe even hundreds, working in sync, shouting, waving torches, creating a wall of noise and fear. The payoff? Enough meat to feed communities for weeks. That kind of abundance also freed time for storytelling, rituals, and innovation, because when your belly is full, your mind wanders. Fishing evolved too. Instead of standing in shallow water with bare hands, sapiens built nets and wove baskets. They carved bone hooks, attached them to plant fibers, and cast lines. In coastal areas, they learned to time the tides, waiting for fish to get trapped in pools. They even built fish weirs, rock barriers in rivers that funneled fish into narrow spaces for easy capture. Each method required foresight, cooperation, and shared teaching. Gathering became smarter in parallel. Plants were no longer just eaten or ignored. They were studied, categorized, and remembered. With language, elders could teach which roots healed, which seeds poisoned, which leaves soothed fevers. That oral library was as important as any spear. Knowledge spread through gossip and myth. Don't eat the red berries near the hill. They belong to the spirits, and the spirits kill. Behind the story was biology, but the story ensured survival. Fire added new dimensions. Roasting meat not only made it tastier, but also easier to chew and digest, unlocking more calories. Cooking tubers and grains neutralized toxins, expanding the human diet. Over time, humans didn't just eat what nature offered, they reshaped diets entirely, choosing, selecting, and sometimes even planting seeds in favorable spots. It wasn't agriculture yet, but it was its shadow. Tracking skills also sharpened. A skilled hunter could read prints in mud, broken twigs and scat. But after the revolution, those observations could be taught systematically. See how the hoof presses deeper. The animal was running. Stories preserved knowledge across generations, refining skills far beyond what instinct alone could offer. Soon, even children grew up absorbing lessons about animal behavior, long before they picked up a spear. The impact of these smarter strategies was profound. Meat intake rose, supporting brain growth with protein and fat. Larger groups could be sustained because food supplies were more reliable. And with more people, cooperation grew tighter, innovation spread faster, and the cycle reinforced itself. Smarter hunting and gathering fed, not just bodies, but the revolution itself. It also gave humans a dangerous edge over rivals. Neanderthals, though strong hunters, relied more on brute force and close combat with spears. Sapiens, with planning and traps, minimized risk. Over time, this efficiency helped sapiens spread across territories Neanderthals had occupied for millennia. Outcompeted, Neanderthals dwindled, while sapiens thrived. The same was true for giant Ice Age animals. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant sloths, all fell before organized strategic hunts. What had once seemed impossible prey became regular meals. Of course, there were consequences. Mass hunts sometimes wiped out entire herds, destabilizing ecosystems. As humans spread, they left waves of extinction in their wake. Australia's giant marsupials, North America's mammoths and saber-toothed cats, all disappeared not long after sapiens arrived. Hunting smarter didn't just feed humans, it reshaped the planet forever. Yet within human groups, these strategies built culture. A successful hunt wasn't just food, it was story. Hunters returned and reenacted the chase around the fire, turning experience into myth. Children grew up hearing how ancestors tricked animals, how spirits guided hunts, how bravery was rewarded. These tales weren't just entertainment, they were instruction manuals wrapped in drama. You can picture it. A band sits under the stars, bellies full after a great kill. Smoke drifts upward, sparks crackle. A hunter leaps up, miming the moment the herd turned. The shouts, the panic, the spears flying. The group roars with laughter, gasps with tension, cheers at the climax. In that retelling, the next generation learns tactics, values and identity. This is how survival knowledge became heritage. And beyond survival, rituals grew. Before a hunt, bands might paint their bodies, sing chants or make offerings. These rituals reinforced unity, gave confidence, and soothed fear. Even if the rituals didn't change animal behavior, they changed human behavior, aligning minds, calming nerves, synchronizing action. Once again, imagination translated into survival. Gathering, too, became ritualized. Festivals around seasonal harvests, dances to celebrate the return of fruit, taboos about who could collect which plants, all created structure. They prevented overuse, ensured fair distribution, and bound communities to the rhythms of nature. Without writing or maps, stories and ceremonies became the calendar. The smarter strategies also freed time. A successful mass hunt, or a well-stocked cache of gathered roots, meant not everyone had to scavenge daily. Free hands could carve, paint, invent, sing. The surplus of calories created a surplus of creativity. In that sense, every cave painting, every flute note, was powered by roasted meat and cooked tubers. Hunting and gathering weren't just about food, they were about fueling the imagination that defined sapiens. Think of it this way. Before the revolution, humans ate to live. After it, they lived to imagine. Food no longer consumed every waking thought. It became the foundation for art, myth, and community. Smarter hunting and gathering bought time, and time bought culture. So as you close your eyes tonight, picture that band once more. The fire burns low, embers glowing. Children sleep, curled against their mothers. Hunters grin, still retelling the day's triumph. Elders hum soft songs, reminding everyone of taboos and blessings. Around them lie spears, baskets, fish traps, the silent evidence of minds that planned, imagined and triumphed. This was the everyday miracle of the cognitive revolution. Survival wasn't just about instinct anymore. It was about stories, strategies, and shared dreams. And those dreams, stitched into every hunt and harvest, carried humanity toward the future. The sharper tools, the richer myths, the smarter hunts, all of these prepared sapiens for their boldest move yet, leaving home. For nearly 200,000 years, Homo sapiens lived only in Africa, evolving and adapting within that cradle of humanity. But after the cognitive revolution, something changed. The same imagination that painted animals on cave walls now pointed to horizons. People could picture lands they had never seen, waters they had never crossed, and slowly, then all at once, they began moving out of Africa. The first steps of this migration were cautious. Small groups pushed northward into the Sinai and the Levant, hugging familiar climates and landscapes. Evidence from caves in Israel suggests sapiens ventured there as early as 20,000 years ago. But those early pioneers either died out or were absorbed by other humans. The real sustained migration happened around 70,000 years ago, Right after the revolution in thought and culture, it wasn't coincidence. With language, planning, and cooperation, humans were suddenly equipped to handle unknown environments. Picture a band deciding to cross into new territory. Before, such a leap would have been reckless. Why abandon the known for the unknown? But now, stories could frame exploration as destiny, ritual could sanctify risk, and planning could prepare supplies. The group could talk about rivers they hadn't seen yet, animals they hoped to find, dangers they feared. They weren't just reacting to the present, they were imagining futures and walking into them. From Africa, they spread in waves. Some followed coastlines, gathering shellfish and fish, leaving behind middens of shells as silent proof. Others pressed inland, adapting to forests, deserts, and grasslands. Within a few thousand years, sapiens had reached the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Think about that. By 65,000 years ago, humans had crossed open water to reach Australia. Long before the invention of compasses or maps, they must have built rafts or canoes, guided by stars, stories, and courage. Migration wasn't just wandering, it was adaptation. Each new environment demanded new strategies. In cold regions, humans stitched tighter clothing, built sturdier shelters, and mastered fire. In forests, they crafted lighter tools, climbed and foraged differently. Along coasts, they became expert fishers and shell gatherers. The ability to imagine and experiment meant they could make almost any environment home. Other human species watched them arrive. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, perhaps even remnants of Homo erectus in Southeast Asia. All encountered sapiens. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they mingled, sometimes they shared genes. The evidence is literally in your DNA. Most modern humans carry traces of Neanderthal or Denisovan ancestry, echoes of encounters tens of thousands of years ago. But over time, sapiens became the dominant branch. Their flexible culture, adaptable strategies, and larger networks gave them the edge. The impact on ecosystems was dramatic. Wherever sapiens went, animals disappeared. In Australia, giant kangaroos, wombat-like diprotodons, and massive flightless birds vanished not long after human arrival. In the Americas, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths fell. It wasn't just hunting, it was fire management, habitat disruption, and sheer numbers. Humans were becoming the most dangerous predator the world had ever seen. But alongside destruction came creativity. Migration spurred invention. Crossing deserts demanded new water strategies. Entering cold tundras demanded new clothing and shelters. Facing strange animals demanded new weapons. Each challenge was an opportunity for innovation, and innovation spread quickly through stories and teaching. What worked in one place was carried to another, refined and shared again. Imagine a group crossing from Africa into the Middle East. They arrive in a land of stone cliffs, sparse trees, and gazelles. At first, they struggle. But soon, someone remembers how to trap animals near ravines. Someone else recalls how to crack certain seeds for food. And together they adapt. They leave ochre handprints on cave walls, as if to say, "We were here." Then their children push farther, and their children farther still, until their descendants stand on distant shores. Migration also reshaped identity. Groups that left Africa carried with them shared myths. But as they spread into new lands, those myths evolved. Spirits of the savannah became spirits of forests, mountains, or seas. Rituals adapted to new resources, new plants, new animals, new cycles of seasons. Culture diversified, branching as rapidly as people moved. Yet all of it traced back to the same cognitive leap, the ability to imagine and share fictions. The psychological shift must have been profound. For generations, people had lived in familiar territories, bound to cycles of hunting and gathering in the same valleys. Now, whole bands were leaving, following visions of lands unseen. The courage to do that required trust in leaders, in myths, in each other. Without shared belief, no one would risk crossing mountains or seas. With it, migration became destiny. By 40,000 years ago, sapiens were in Europe, painting caves and hunting mammoths. By 30,000 years ago, they reached Siberia. By at least 15,000 years ago, they had crossed into the Americas, following herds across land bridges or boats along coasts. Within a few millennia, they occupied every continent except Antarctica. From one small corner of Africa, humans had become a global species. The key wasn't speed or strength, it was adaptability. Neanderthals were strong, but specialized. Sapiens were weaker but endlessly flexible. They could eat more foods, imagine more strategies, and cooperate with more strangers. The cognitive revolution made them the ultimate generalists, capable of thriving in deserts, jungles, tundras, and islands. Picture yourself standing with one of those migrating bands. The night is cold, the wind sharp, ahead lies a mountain pass no one has ever crossed. The group is nervous. Then the leader, or maybe the shaman, begins a story of ancestors watching, of spirits guiding, of rewards waiting. The story quiets fear, stirs courage, and in the morning the band climbs. Step by step, imagination pushes them into the unknown. That was humanity's pattern, moving not just with feet, but with dreams. And those dreams reshaped the earth. Every continent bears the marks of that migration: tools buried in soil, bones charred by fire, art hidden in caves. Wherever sapiens went, they carried their revolution, turning landscapes into stages for story and survival. So tonight, as you drift, think of that journey. Think of barefoot travelers following coastlines, of children carried across rivers, of elders whispering prayers to new skies. Think of the courage to walk into lands unseen, guided only by stories and trust. That courage is in your blood. It is why you sit here now, thousands of generations later, telling stories still. By the time Homo sapiens were spreading across Asia, Europe, and eventually into the Americas, they were no longer just another clever primate on the savannah. They had become a force of nature. Yet they weren't alone. Other human species still roamed the earth, most famously the Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, and the Denisovans further east. For a time, the world was a crowded stage of cousins, different humankinds, all descended from earlier ancestors, all making their way through Ice Age landscapes. The cognitive revolution would decide who endured. Neanderthals had a reputation. Stocky, broad-shouldered, with barrel chests, and powerful arms, they were built for cold climates and heavy work. Their brains were even slightly larger than sapiens on average. They used stone tools, controlled fire, hunted big game, and even buried their dead. For thousands of years, they dominated Europe. Then sapiens arrived around 45,000 years ago. At first the encounters may have been tentative, curious, but soon competition sharpened. Both species hunted the same prey, sought the same caves, and eyed each other with suspicion. On paper, Neanderthals should have had the edge. They were stronger, better suited to brutal winters, deeply experienced in their territories. But sapiens brought something new: flexible thinking, symbolic culture, and larger cooperative groups, bound by language and myth. Neanderthals could cooperate, yes, but usually in smaller family-based bands. Sapiens, by contrast, could unite dozens, even hundreds, through shared stories, gossip, and rituals. In conflicts, numbers matter, and sapiens had the numbers. The archaeological record hints at this clash. In some regions, Neanderthal artifacts vanish shortly after sapiens arrive. In others, there's evidence of interbreeding. DNA shows that non-African humans today carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal genes, proof of encounters that were not always hostile. Some of those genes influence immune systems, helping sapiens adapt to new climates and diseases. In Asia, Denisovan genes left similar traces, especially in populations living at high altitudes, like Tibetans, whose ability to thrive in thin air may come from that inheritance. Still, interbreeding couldn't save the Neanderthals or Denisovans. Within a few thousand years of sapiens spreading, those cousins dwindled into extinction. Why? Theories abound. Climate shifts hurt Neanderthals, but they had weathered ice ages before. Disease carried by sapiens may have played a role. Violence and competition for resources certainly mattered. But most of all, sapiens' cognitive edge tilted the scales. Their ability to plan hunts, trade widely, and cooperate flexibly allowed them to outlast and outmaneuver their cousins. Imagine the difference between the two groups. A Neanderthal band, maybe 20 strong, hunts mammoths with thrusting spears, each individual relying on raw strength and courage. A sapiens band of 50 or more surrounds the herd, using fire, noise, and traps to channel animals into ravines, coordinated through shouts and signals. The Sapiens method is less risky for individuals, more efficient overall, and produces surplus food to support larger families. In evolutionary terms, that efficiency wins. There's also evidence of symbolic difference. Neanderthal sites show occasional beads or ochre use, but these are rare and isolated. Sapiens, by contrast, seem to have embraced symbolism everywhere. Jewelry, art, ritual burials, decorated tools. Symbols weren't just decoration, they were communication technology. They allowed ideas to spread farther and faster, strengthening social bonds across groups. Where Neanderthals may have been bound by kin, Sapiens were bound by culture. That difference meant Sapiens could scale society beyond the family, creating networks that stretched hundreds of miles. Yet it would be a mistake to imagine Neanderthals as brutes. They were intelligent, emotional, and capable. Fossils show they cared for the injured, even those who could not hunt, suggesting compassion. They buried their dead, hinting at belief or ritual. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years in harsh climates, a feat requiring resilience and skill. Their disappearance wasn't because they were stupid, it was because Sapiens had discovered a new operating system for the brain, one that allowed them to adapt and expand at an unmatched pace. And what of the Denisovans? We know them mostly from fragments of bone and teeth, plus DNA. They likely lived across parts of Asia, adapting to different environments. Like Neanderthals, they interbred with Sapiens, leaving genetic traces. They may have been fewer in number, or their populations more scattered, making them vulnerable when Sapiens surged across the continent. Their mystery lingers, a reminder that the human story once had many more branches. By about 30,000 years ago, Sapiens stood alone as the last human species. Every cousin had vanished, leaving only faint echoes in our genes. The Earth was now theirs. But victory came with shadows. When Sapiens looked around, they saw no rivals, not because rivals had never existed, but because they had outlasted, absorbed or outcompeted them. The world was emptier, lonelier, and entirely in their hands. The consequences of this were enormous. With no competing human species, Sapiens became the sole inventors, dreamers and builders of culture. Every story, every tool, every ritual now flowed through their lineage. This monopoly on imagination allowed culture to accelerate without interruption, creating a snowball effect that would roll all the way to cities, empires, and satellites. Imagine the gravity of that moment. Even if the people themselves didn't perceive it. A group huddles by a fire in a European cave. Outside, snow falls heavily. They sing chants to spirits, carve lines into bone, and sharpen spears. They don't know that a few valleys away, the last Neanderthal families are fading, their voices never to be heard again. They don't know that in a few thousand years, their descendants will fill continents. All they know is that their stories live, their children survive, and their gods listen. That quiet confidence, born of shared fictions, would carry humanity forward. In the long run, the Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't vanish completely. They live in us, in snippets of DNA that still shape our immune systems, our metabolism, even our altitude tolerance. Every time you catch a cold, digest certain foods, or climb a mountain, you may be drawing on gifts from those ancient cousins. They are ghosts in our blood, reminding us that Sapiens were not alone in their rise. But the larger truth is this: the cognitive revolution was not just about becoming smarter, it was about becoming different. Neanderthals had big brains, but did not create global myths. Denisovans had strong bodies, but did not leave behind art-filled caves. Only Sapiens crossed the line into full symbolic culture, and that leap changed everything. So as you close your eyes tonight, think of that silent turning point. Imagine a Neanderthal and a Sapiens standing side by side, indistinguishable to the untrained eye, both strong, both capable. But inside the Sapiens' skull, stories swirl of spirits, futures, plans and symbols. That invisible difference, no bigger than a spark of imagination, tipped the balance of history. And from that spark, a species took the world. By the time Homo sapiens stood alone as the last surviving human species, they had already begun reshaping the earth in ways no animal had ever done before. Other creatures altered their environments. Beavers built dams, termites raised mounds, ants cultivated fungus, but sapiens took transformation to an entirely new scale. The cognitive revolution gave them tools, cooperation and imagination enough to not only adapt to landscapes but to bend landscapes to their will. One of the earliest methods of transformation was fire. Long before farming, sapiens understood that fire could do more than cook food or warm bodies. It could change ecosystems. Groups began setting controlled burns to clear brush, drive animals into traps, and encourage fresh plant growth. A patch of forest set alight one season might return the next year with tender shoots, drawing grazing herds. Fire became an invisible hand, sculpting landscapes. In Australia, evidence shows humans used firestick farming as early as 45,000 years ago, burning wide swaths of land to maintain open grasslands. The effect was profound. Species that relied on dense forest declined, while grazing animals flourished until overhunting and habitat change wiped many of them out altogether. Hunting itself was another force of change. Smarter strategies driving herds into ravines, ambushing at choke points, building traps meant sapiens could kill in large numbers. Mass kill sites litter the archaeological record. Hundreds of bison bones piled in a valley, mammoth skeletons clustered near cliffs. Such hunts fed communities for weeks, but devastated local herds. Over time, repeated pressure drove species toward extinction. In places like North America, entire ecosystems collapsed within a few centuries of human arrival. Sapiens also reshaped the animal kingdom more directly. Dogs were the first to be domesticated, their partnership dating back perhaps 30,000 years. What began as wolves scavenging near camps grew into mutual trust. Humans fed them scraps. Wolves warned of predators. Over generations, the friendlier wolves became companions, hunting allies, and eventually fully domesticated dogs. This partnership altered both species forever. Later came goats, sheep, and cattle. But even before farming, sapiens were already nudging evolution by favoring certain traits in animals they relied on. Plants, too, were influenced. Though agriculture was still tens of thousands of years away, hunter-gatherers managed wild resources carefully. They learned which patches of tubers yielded best, which fruit trees produced sweetest, which nuts were worth protecting. Sometimes they transplanted seeds near camps, ensuring future harvests. This proto-gardening was a subtle but crucial step toward the agricultural revolution. It showed that humans were no longer passive consumers of nature. They were beginning to act as managers, and their footprint spread. As sapiens migrated into new lands, ecosystems changed rapidly. In Australia, marsupial giants like diprotodons and thunderbirds disappeared within a few millennia. In the Americas, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats fell soon after humans arrived. Climate change played a role, but the timing is suspiciously tight. Where sapiens went, megafauna often vanished. This pattern suggests humans were not just another species finding a niche. They were becoming planetary engineers, reshaping the very balance of life. For those living it, these changes may not have been obvious. To a hunter on the Ice Age steppe, setting fire to grass seemed practical, not world-altering. To a family raising a tamer wolf pup, it felt like survival, not domestication. Yet each choice echoed outward, layering impact upon impact, until the earth itself bore the mark of human thought. And it wasn't only the physical environment. Humans transformed mental landscapes too. As groups grew larger and more complex, new forms of order emerged, rules, taboos, and rituals that regulated behavior. These invisible landscapes were just as important as burning forests or driving herds. They governed who could marry whom, when hunts could begin, how food was shared. They shaped society into more stable forms, allowing groups to cooperate beyond kinship. Consider taboos about food. Some groups declared certain animals sacred or forbidden, ensuring populations weren't overhunted. Others tied rituals to seasonal harvests, regulating when and how resources were taken. These cultural practices weren't random. They were early forms of environmental management encoded in myth. To the people, it was obeying spirits. In practice, it was sustainability. Storytelling magnified these mental landscapes. A myth about a river spirit might prevent reckless swimming in crocodile-infested waters. A tale of an ancestor punished for greed could enforce fair sharing. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were laws written in memory, ensuring survival strategies were passed down without written words. The ability to reshape landscapes, both physical and cultural, gave sapiens a unique edge. Neanderthals may have been strong, Denisovans hardy, but they left relatively light marks on their environments. Sapiens, within a few thousand years, left craters of impact visible, even today. Forests burned, species vanished, rivers diverted, territories reshaped, and once begun, the habit of reshaping never stopped. Imagine a scene on the steppes of Eurasia. A group gathers dry grass and sets a controlled fire. Smoke billows, antelope scatter, and hunters wait in ambush. Hours later, carcasses lie cooling, meat piled high. The next season, the burned patch sprouts tender shoots, drawing new herds. To the hunters, it's a cycle of abundance. To us, it's ecosystem engineering. Or picture an Ice Age camp where children play with wolf pups, tossing scraps of bone. Slowly, those pups grow friendlier, weaving themselves into the rhythm of the group. No one realizes it yet, but the bond will one day create a companion species that guards doorways and sleeps at our feet. These transformations carried costs, of course. Overhunting led to scarcity, forcing groups to move more often. Burning forests altered rainfall patterns, sometimes leaving barren soil. Species extinctions removed keystone animals, destabilizing ecosystems, but sapiens were adaptable. When one strategy backfired, they invented another. Trial and error, guided by imagination, made them resilient. The Earth, however, could not so easily adapt. By the end of the Ice Age, vast swaths of the planet looked different because of humans. Grasslands stretched where forests had been. Predator populations dwindled where prey was overhunted, and in many regions, the great megafauna, the colossal animals that had roamed for millions of years, were gone. For the first time in history, one species was rewriting the rules for all others. This was the true legacy of the cognitive revolution. It wasn't only sharper spears or richer myths. It was the realization, conscious or not, that humans could alter the world itself. No other species had imagined so boldly, acted so collectively, or reshaped so completely. And once that power was unleashed, it would never be contained again. So tonight, as you drift off, imagine the glow of fire on a dark plain. Picture hunters watching smoke rise as herds stampede. Picture children giggling as wolf pups curl into their arms. Picture rivers, forests, and mountains slowly bending to human will. The revolution was not just in the mind, it was etched into the earth. One flame, one hunt, one story at a time. As humans spread across continents and reshaped landscapes with fire and strategy, another quiet revolution unfolded. One not of spears or flames but of exchange. The cognitive revolution didn't just give sapiens sharper tools and richer myths. It gave them the ability to build networks of trade, passing goods and ideas from one group to another, across astonishing distances. For the first time in history, information and materials began flowing through webs that stretched far beyond immediate families or local bands. Imagine a band of foragers camped near a river in what is now East Africa. They've collected obsidian, a volcanic glass sharp enough to slice through hide and bone. But obsidian is rare, and other groups desire it. Meanwhile, a neighboring band lives closer to the coast, with access to seashells perfect for beads. Alone, each group has something valuable, but limited. Together, through exchange, both benefit. Shells move inland, obsidian moves outward. The result is more than a swap of goods. It's a web of trust and cooperation. Archaeologists uncover this story in the evidence. Shells from the Red Sea turn up hundreds of miles inland. Obsidian from one volcanic source appears at sites dozens of kilometers away. These objects didn't walk themselves, they were carried by humans, handed over across fires, exchanged through handshakes, sealed with promises. Trade routes were not yet roads but footpaths trodden by countless feet, marked by memory and story. Trade wasn't only about objects. It was about knowledge. A new way of knapping stone, a trick for weaving fibers, a method for preserving meat. All of these could travel from group to group. Each encounter was an opportunity to learn. Picture two hunters from different bands meeting by chance at a watering hole. They gesture, swap gifts, and while they sit, one demonstrates a better spear tip, the other shows a way to braid cordage. They part ways, and when they return to their camps, they carry more than beads. They carry innovation. Over generations, these exchanges knit distant groups into loose networks. A person in one valley might wear beads carved from shells that originated hundreds of miles away, passed hand to hand through many intermediaries. The bead was not just decoration, It was proof of connection, a symbol of belonging to a world larger than one's immediate band. Trade made strangers less strange, softening suspicion with shared interests. Trust was fragile, of course. Without police, contracts, or courts, deals depended on reputation and ritual. Myths often served as guarantees. The spirits will punish cheaters. Ritual gestures, handing over gifts, sharing meals, singing songs, reinforced honesty. Even gossip helped. If one band cheated, word spread quickly, cutting them off from future exchanges. In this way, culture enforced fairness long before legal codes existed. Trade also encouraged specialization. Some groups became known for particular skills or resources. The best flint knappers, the richest shell collectors, the most skilled weavers. Others traveled as middlemen, carrying goods between distant regions. This division of roles enriched everyone. No band had to master everything. Instead, they could rely on neighbors. Cooperation expanded beyond survival into economy. The ripple effects were enormous. Trade linked not just materials but ideas and identities. A new ritual could spread from one band to another, evolving along the way. A song hummed in one valley might echo in another, altered but recognizable. Over time, these exchanges stitched together cultures across vast landscapes, creating early versions of regional identities. Consider Europe around 40,000 years ago. Groups of sapiens arriving from Africa began carving ivory figurines and painting caves. Within a few thousand years, similar styles appeared across wide regions, suggesting ideas traveled far beyond one community. Or look to Africa, where beads and ochre found at inland sites prove coastal trade routes carried symbols of identity deep into the continent. These weren't isolated bands, they were participants in a slow but steady cultural exchange. Trade also deepened the role of imagination. To exchange goods, humans had to assign value, not inherent in the object itself. A shiny bead had no survival use, yet it carried symbolic worth. This was the earliest form of economic fiction. The belief that something could represent value because people agreed it did. That fiction would one day evolve into money. But here in the deep past, it was already transforming human life. Conflict, of course, mingled with exchange. Not every meeting ended peacefully. Sometimes groups fought over resources, and beads or shells were taken as plunder rather than gifts. But even conflict reinforced the idea that objects carried meaning. Spoils of war became symbols of power, and over time, peaceful trade generally paid off more than violence. Groups that built reputations for fairness gained more partners, more goods, more resilience. The logic of cooperation, strengthened by the revolution, tilted humans toward exchange. Imagine being part of one of these exchanges. You approach a strange camp, clutching a pouch of obsidian. The strangers eye you warily. Then one steps forward, holding a necklace of shells. Words are few, gestures careful. You place the obsidian on the ground. They place the shells beside it. Both sides smile, nervous but relieved. Then someone offers roasted meat, and you eat together, sealing the deal with trust. When you return home, your people marvel at the shells, and you tell the story of the trade. Weeks later, a child wears those shells proudly, carrying not just decoration but the memory of connection. This was the magic of trade. It turned strangers into partners, suspicion into cooperation, and isolated bands into networks. It allowed ideas to leap across distances, goods to circulate, and cultures to intertwine. It was the quiet highway of the cognitive revolution, invisible yet powerful. Fast forward in your mind, and you see its legacy everywhere. Today's global economy, with cargo ships and digital currencies, is built on the same principle: shared trust in symbols of value. Every coin, every contract, every credit card swipe traces back to those first exchanges of shells and stones. Humans learned to believe in value beyond survival, and that belief bound them into worlds far larger than any one band. So tonight, as you close your eyes, picture those first networks forming. Picture shells glinting in firelight, obsidian blades flashing, hands meeting across boundaries. Picture the invisible threads stretching outward, weaving camps into regions, regions into cultures. The revolution was not just in minds, it was in connections, each trade a strand in the web of humanity, and from those strands, civilization itself would one day be spun. As trade networks expanded and myths deepened, another layer of the cognitive revolution emerged. Spirituality. It wasn't enough for humans to explain the world with tools and strategies. They began to reach for meaning beyond survival, imagining forces that shaped life and death. Evidence from burials, rituals, and symbolic objects shows that early sapiens were not just practical hunters and gatherers. They were spiritual beings, weaving belief into daily life, binding communities with shared ceremonies, and finding comfort in the unseen. One of the clearest signs is burial. Before the revolution, when a body fell, it might have been left to scavengers or covered with rocks. But around 100,000 to 70,000 years ago, we see burials treated with care, graves sprinkled with red ochre, beads strung around necks, tools placed at the side of the dead. These gestures suggest belief in something beyond the idea that death was not an end, but a passage. Why give a corpse beads or blades, unless you think they will need them? Why paint the dead in ochre unless you believe color has meaning beyond decay? These choices whisper of worlds unseen. Spirituality likely began with animism. The belief that everything from rivers to trees to animals carried spirit. For hunter-gatherers this made sense. A river gave life but could also drown. A lion was both predator and teacher. Thunder shook the sky with power no spear could match. To see spirit in these forces gave them personality, and personality made them relatable. You could pray to a storm, bargain with a river, honor a lion. Suddenly, humans were not alone in the wilderness. They were surrounded by a community of beings, some visible, some invisible. Rituals grew naturally from this belief. Before a hunt, a band might chant or paint themselves, asking animal spirits for favor. After a kill, they might offer bones or blood in thanks. Around fires, shamans, those who claimed special connection with unseen forces, told stories, performed dances, entered trances. Whether through drumming, chanting, or herbs, these altered states gave the sense of touching other worlds. The community watched, awed, reassured that someone could speak to the powers that governed their lives. Music and dance were essential parts of ritual. Drums echoed heartbeat rhythms, flutes wailed like wind, voices rose in chorus. Moving together, people felt united, their fear of predators or hunger softened by the rhythm of community. Anthropologists note that such rituals release chemicals in the brain, reducing anxiety, strengthening trust. Our ancestors didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the feeling. Ritual gave courage. Spiritual beliefs also carried practical benefits. Taboos about certain foods or behaviors often protected communities. A story warning that a spirit guards poisonous berries kept children safe. A myth about ancestral punishment for hoarding encouraged sharing. Rules tied to ritual ensured cooperation, even when no one was watching. Spirits, after all, were always watching. Archaeology offers striking evidence. The Lion Man figurine of Germany, carved from mammoth ivory about 40,000 years ago, shows a human body with a lion's head. This wasn't random art. It was a being of imagination, perhaps a god or guardian. In France's caves, torchlight reveals not just animals but symbols that may have been part of ritual. In Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, built much later but still by foragers, towering stone pillars carved with animals suggest ritual centers long before farming. These sites prove that spirituality was not a footnote, it was central. Spirituality also shaped identity. Groups define themselves not just by what they hunted or traded, but by what they believe. One band might honor bird spirits, another lion ancestors. These shared beliefs gave cohesion, making communities stronger. They also distinguished groups from rivals. We are the people of the mountain spirit. They are not. This could unite within, but also spark conflict between. Religion, even in its earliest forms, had the double edge of bonding and dividing. Imagine a night on the tundra. The wind howls, snow drifts. In a cave, a band gathers around a fire. A shaman beats a drum, chants rising, eyes closed. The group sways, chanting back. Children watch wide-eyed as adults call to spirits for protection, for a successful hunt, for the safe birth of babies. Outside, predators circle, but inside, there is warmth, rhythm, meaning. The ritual doesn't just pass time, it creates unity, courage, and the feeling that they are not alone. The rise of spirituality also marked a profound cognitive leap. Abstraction. To believe in spirits is to imagine what cannot be seen. To assign personality to wind and water, it requires symbolic thought, the ability to think beyond the immediate. This leap gave humans more than comfort. It gave them a framework to organize life. Through myth and ritual, life's chaos felt structured. Birth, death, sickness, hunger, each had meaning, each was part of a story. And as with trade, spirituality spread. Beliefs traveled with beads and obsidian, carried in stories told by travelers. A ritual in one valley might be adapted in another. New spirits added, old ones renamed. Religion became a cultural current, flowing across landscapes, linking strangers through shared symbols. It was another invisible thread in the web of humanity. Even today, the echoes remain. Every time people gather for ceremony, chant in unison, or mark death with ritual, they repeat the patterns first shaped in the cognitive revolution. The instinct to seek meaning beyond survival, to trust in unseen forces, to bind community through belief that is one of the deepest inheritances of our species. So tonight, picture those ancient ceremonies. A fire crackles, shadows dance on cave walls, figures painted in ochre sway to drum beats, eyes shining with belief. Outside, the world is dangerous and dark. Inside, there is order, hope, connection. That was the gift of spirituality, to turn fear into meaning, survival into community, existence into story, and once discovered, it would never be forgotten. The cognitive revolution had given Homo sapiens sharper tools, richer myths, and the ability to move across continents. But its consequences didn't stop at survival or spirituality. It also set off a chain reaction of growth and transformation that would change the destiny of the species forever. With bigger groups, stronger cooperation, and expanding networks, populations grew rapidly. More people meant more pressure on resources, more innovation, more conflicts, and more opportunities. The revolution was both a gift and a burden, opening doors while unleashing dangers. First, consider population. Before the revolution, human numbers were small, scattered in fragile bands that rose and fell with food supply. Afterward, with smarter hunting, better gathering, and cooperation on larger scales, groups could sustain more children. Fire kept camps warmer, clothing sewn with bone needles, shielded against cold, and surplus food from organized hunts meant fewer starved and lean seasons. Population curves began to climb. What had been tens of thousands of sapiens across Africa became hundreds of thousands, then millions as they spread worldwide. More people meant more competition. Neighboring bands bumped into each other more often. Sometimes they traded, but other times they fought. Violence was nothing new. But now conflicts could be organized, strategic, and devastating. Groups united by myth and ritual were willing to defend territory fiercely, and the scale of battle grew. A dozen hunters could clash with another dozen, not just over prey but over rivers, caves, or symbolic honor. Archaeological sites show mass graves with signs of violent deaths, proof that cooperation made humans deadlier to each other, as well as to animals. But growth also meant innovation. Larger groups had more brains to think, more hands to experiment. Ideas multiplied. A clever technique, invented by one person, could spread to dozens, then hundreds across networks. Cumulative culture accelerated, each generation starting from a higher point. Tools improved faster, art spread wider, rituals deepened. The pace of change was no longer glacial. In evolutionary terms, it was a sprint. The flip side was pressure on the environment. Overhunting wiped out megafauna in region after region. Controlled fires transformed ecosystems, often permanently. As human populations grew, landscapes bent under the weight. In some areas, prey dwindled so sharply that groups had to migrate or starve. In others, resource pressure pushed innovation, fishing where hunting failed, storing food where gathering was scarce. The revolution made sapiens masters of adaptation, but it also forced them into cycles of boom and bust. Diseases began to matter more too. Larger, denser groups created opportunities for infections to spread, while small bands could stamp out illness by isolation. Bigger gatherings allowed germs to linger. Early humans had no concept of microbes, but they responded with rituals, taboos, and myths to explain sickness. Shamans treated fevers with chants and herbs. Burial practices expanded to handle outbreaks, and suspicion sometimes fell on outsiders. Disease in its own way shaped human cooperation, forcing groups to balance openness with caution. The revolution also transformed gender and social roles. Before, tasks were more evenly spread. Everyone gathered, hunted, and shared. Afterward, specialization deepened. Some individuals became experts in tool-making, others in rituals, others in healing. Roles hardened, and hierarchies emerged. Leaders gained authority not just by strength, but by storytelling, persuasion, and symbolic power. A skilled shaman might command as much respect as a skilled hunter, even if he or she never threw a spear. This shift created more complex societies, with layers of status and influence. Childhood too changed. With language and imagination, teaching expanded far beyond imitation. Parents and elders told stories, recounted myths, gave instructions. Children didn't just watch, they listened, absorbed, and imagined. Education became cultural, not just practical. This meant knowledge could accumulate faster, but it also meant norms and rules could be drilled into the young, binding them more tightly to community. Childhood became the crucible of culture, where minds were shaped for cooperation. All these changes carried consequences for the future. The same population growth that fueled innovation also demanded more food. The same imagination that united groups also created divisions between them. The same ability to reshape landscapes also destroyed habitats. The cognitive revolution wasn't just a triumph, it was a turning point, sending sapiens down a path of both greatness and danger. Imagine a camp, bursting with children. More than ever before, they chase each other, play with small bows, mimic hunts. Elders smile, proud of survival, but they also frown, worried about food. Tomorrow's hunt must be larger, tomorrow's fires bigger. Population growth is a blessing and a curse, forcing the group to stretch farther, work harder, imagine more. In those pressures lay the seeds of the next revolution. Agriculture. Another consequence was identity. As groups grew and spread, cultures diversified, myths changed shape, art styles varied, rituals differed. Humans became not one culture but many, each with its own fictions, rules, and symbols. Unity within groups strengthened, but so did divisions between groups. Where once humans were simply us, now they were us versus them. That dynamic, born in the cognitive revolution, would echo all the way to modern borders and conflicts. And yet, the benefits outweighed the dangers. Sapiens were no longer fragile bands clinging to survival. They were a species on the rise, expanding in number, imagination, and reach. Every cave painting, every bead necklace, every shared story was proof of growth. They were becoming history makers, not just survivors. Picture it: a night sky filled with stars, a camp buzzing with voices. Elders tell stories of spirits, hunters sharpen spears, women weave fibers into cords, children chase fireflies. The air smells of smoke and roasted meat. Beneath it all hums a new energy. The energy of a species growing, innovating, pushing forward. It is not without cost. The prey will thin, rivalries will sharpen, sickness will spread, but the march is unstoppable. Humanity has crossed the threshold, and there is no going back. The revolution was never about perfection. It was about possibility. With brains wired for imagination and cooperation, sapiens had stepped onto a path that would one day lead to farming, cities, writing, empires, and rockets. But at this stage, it was still raw, still fragile, still messy. Population growth, innovation, and danger walked hand in hand. That paradox, the brilliance and the burden, was the true consequence of the cognitive revolution. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, let yourself hear the murmur of that camp. Babies cry, fires crackle, hunters laugh, shamans chant. 1,000 generations separate you from them. Yet you are their heir. Their struggles, their stories, their innovations, all led to you. And like them, you carry the burden of imagination, to dream, to build, to change, and to risk. That burden is both heavy and glorious, and it began in those fires long ago. By the time the cognitive revolution had fully unfolded, humanity had already secured its place as the most adaptable species on Earth. But the story doesn't end with sharper spears, richer myths, or faster migrations. Its true legacy lies in what came after, in how the mental leap of 70,000 years ago set the stage for everything that followed: agriculture, civilization, science, and eventually the digital glow lighting your face right now. The revolution was not a single moment, it was a fuse, lit in the dark, burning slowly until it ignited the world. The leap from survival to story was the foundation. Once humans could believe in invisible things, spirits, myths, rules, they could also believe in invisible systems. That same mental trick that let a forager honor the spirit of a river would later allow farmers to honor a god of harvest, citizens to respect a king they never met, and bankers to trust coins stamped with a symbol. Shared fictions became the glue of large-scale societies. Without them, no city, no empire, no economy could function. Think of agriculture. 10,000 years ago, people began planting seeds deliberately, tending fields, and domesticating animals. Farming required immense cooperation, families working side by side, villages sharing irrigation, generations passing down techniques. But farming also demanded patience, the ability to imagine future harvests months away. That ability was born in the cognitive revolution, when humans first pictured outcomes beyond the present. Without imagination, you don't plant seeds in spring for food in autumn. Writing, too, traces back to the revolution. Early humans carved symbols, painted dots and lines, left handprints. These were the ancestors of scripts, the first steps toward recording information outside memory. Writing allowed myths to solidify, trade to expand, and laws to endure. But the habit of symbolizing the unseen began with those first ochre patterns on bone. Science, in its deepest sense, is another descendant. The urge to explain, to test, to understand forces beyond sight. That curiosity began when a hunter wondered why storms came, or when a shaman claimed to speak with spirits. The questions were framed in myth, but the drive to know was real. That drive eventually shed spirits and embraced experiments, but its roots stretch back to the revolution's curiosity. And what of modern life? Every global system, money, nations, religions, corporations, runs on shared fictions. A dollar has value because people believe it does. A flag commands loyalty because people agree it matters. Even the idea, human rights, exists because billions believe in its moral truth, though you can't touch or weigh it. This ability to invent and maintain collective myths is humanity's superpower, and it was unlocked in that long-ago leap of thought. Yet the legacy is double-edged. The same imagination that united communities also divided them. Myths of belonging created us, but they also created them. Stories that inspired cooperation also fueled wars. The revolution gave humans the power to dream, but dreams can be nightmares too. It is why history is filled with both beauty and bloodshed, temples and trenches, symphonies and slaughters. Still, the arc is undeniable. From a few scattered bands in Africa, Sapiens became the architects of civilizations, the painters of cathedrals, the builders of rockets. None of it was inevitable. Without the cognitive revolution, we might still be chipping the same hand axes, limited to small groups, vulnerable to extinction. Instead, we became world shapers, even world breakers. The leap in imagination and cooperation was the hinge on which our story turned. Picture the line of inheritance. A handprint on a cave wall becomes a hieroglyph on papyrus, then a verse in a holy book, then a paragraph in a constitution, then a line of code lighting up your screen. A bead strung on sinew becomes a coin, then a banknote, then a digital currency moving invisibly across continents. A chant to the spirits of the hunt becomes a hymn, then a national anthem, then a pop song streaming through headphones. Every step is evolution, but the root is the same. The ability to create, believe and share fictions. And what of you, lying here, listening to this story? You are a direct product of that revolution. Your ability to picture the past, to worry about the future, to dream in symbols, all of it was born in those campfires. 70,000 years ago, when you imagine tomorrow's tasks, when you tell a joke, when you scroll through endless feeds, you are exercising the same gift. The cognitive revolution didn't just shape history, it shaped your mind. As the story winds down, let the imagery soften. Picture an ancient night on the savannah. The stars are fierce, unpolluted by city lights. A band gathers around a fire, its glow licking the dark. A shaman tells a story of spirits guiding the hunt. Children lean close, eyes wide. Hunters smile, exhausted but proud. Behind them the plain stretches silent, filled with danger. But here, within the circle of firelight, there is meaning, connection and peace. That was the beginning. Now drift further. Imagine thousands of such fires across continents, flickering in caves, on coasts, in forests. Each fire a point of light, each story a thread. Slowly the lights multiply, weaving into networks, cultures, civilizations. Cities rise, towers pierce the sky, satellites orbit above, and still, at the core, humans gather in circles around fires, around tables, around screens, telling stories that give life meaning. The cognitive revolution was not just about becoming smarter. It was about becoming human. It gave us the gift of shared imagination, and with it the power to change the world. That gift is still with you now, in every thought and dream. So as you close your eyes tonight, let the pace slow. Breathe deep, steady, gentle. The fires of the past fade into embers. The voices of ancestors soften to whispers. You are safe, carried by their stories, warmed by their legacy. Sleep comes like the slow drift of ash in the night air, and in that quiet, remember, you are the heir of a revolution in the mind, the revolution that still burns within you. Good night, dreamer of stories. Sweet dreams.